Hi, I'm Ross Colebrook, and I'm here with another episode for our critical thinking course. Today we're covering abduction, so cue the spooky music. In order to understand abduction, we first need to distinguish it from two other types of inference. The first is deduction, which is an inference that necessitates its conclusion. So, for example, all cows moo, Bessie is a cow, so Bessie moos. If it's true that all cows moo, and it's true that Bessie is a cow, it must be the case that Bessie moos. There's no way around it. The second kind of inference is induction. This is an inference that aims to make its conclusion probable. So, for example, most cows eat grass, Bessie is a cow, so Bessie eats grass. Even if the two premises are true, this doesn't guarantee that Bessie eats grass. Maybe she's just one of the cows who eats corn. Finally, the third type of inference, which we're paying special attention to today, is abduction. This is an inference that aims to explain a phenomenon. For example, Bessie is missing, the fence is broken, so she escaped through the fence. Every good abduction, or abductive inference, starts with a phenomenon that we want to explain. A phenomenon, by the way, is just anything that we experience with our senses. So suppose I walk out of my house and I see that my cow Bessie is missing, and I see additionally that the fence is broken. I want to explain what happened. So I come up with a theory. Bessie must have forced her way out in search of greener pastures. Now, not all theories are created equal. There's a phenomenon that I'm trying to explain, namely that Bessie is missing, and there's a theory that I proposed that Bessie forced her way out in search of greener pastures. But we could imagine somebody coming along and providing an even wackier theory that Bessie was abducted by aliens. Now, how are we supposed to tell which of these theories is better? We do so using what philosophers call the criteria of adequacy for abductive arguments. Now, there are 5 of these, and each of them is a matter of degree. The first is testability, which is the degree to which a theory can be tested to show whether it's true or false. The second is scope, which is the degree to which a theory explains diverse phenomena. Next is fruitfulness, which is the degree to which a theory yields predictions that reveal new phenomena. Fourth, simplicity, which is the degree to which a theory minimizes the number of postulated entities and forces. And fifth, conservatism, which is the degree to which a theory conforms to our well-established beliefs. Each of the criteria of adequacy are a matter of philosophical debate, and all of them have a long history in the philosophy of science. But most philosophers agree that these are the major criteria that we use when we're telling between different theories. So let's look at how each of these criteria can be applied in this particular case and figure out whether Bessie really was abducted by aliens or not. Many philosophers believe that what distinguishes scientific theories from non-scientific theories, or pseudoscience, is whether the theory can be tested or not. So when we're comparing various theories in trying to explain some phenomenon, we should ask ourselves, what experiment could I do to prove that this theory is false? Now, you may be wondering, wait, but if I prove that this theory is false, won't that be a bad theory? Well, yes, but theories that in principle are untestable are actually much worse than theories that are testable. A testable theory is always better than an untestable theory. To get an idea of why this is the case, let's apply this criterion to explaining Bessie's absence. So, theory 1 says that Bessie broke the fence and escaped. Now, that's an eminently testable theory. We can get other cows that are also unsatisfied with their pastures and leave cameras up to see whether they get the same idea that Bessie may have gotten. And remember, the goal isn't to try to just think of ways that the theory might be proven true, but more importantly, ways that we might prove the theory false. So suppose we put new cows into this pasture and we watch them with cameras for years. If after years none of them had escaped, this would be strong evidence against theory 1. It would mean that this kind of thing, if it ever happens, is very rare, and so we should maybe not believe that it's going on. Now compare this to theory 2 though, and remember theory 2 is that Bessie was abducted by aliens. Well, this theory is hardly testable at all. If alien abductions happen, they're presumably really rare. So putting more cows into the pasture and watching them with a camera isn't going to be all that helpful for testing whether theory 2 is correct. When we get hundreds of hours of cows just standing in the pasture and not an alien in sight, somebody who's a proponent of this theory will just say, yeah, but what did you expect? Aliens don't abduct cows all the time. Even if we have lots of resources to test theory 2, we'll be hard-pressed to actually disprove it. And that means that this theory is largely untestable, and that's not a good thing. The second criterion of adequacy is scope. Many philosophers think that providing a unifying explanation of many different things in our experience is the mark of a good theory. So when we're comparing theories, we should ask ourselves, how many separate phenomena does this theory explain? A theory that only explains a single thing is a bad theory, whereas a theory that explains a lot of seemingly unrelated things is much better. Let's return to our Bessie example and compare the two theories when it comes to scope. So theory 1, which says that Bessie broke the fence and escaped on her own, has a decent amount of scope. It explains at least two phenomena. Number 1, that she is absent from the field, and number 2, that the fence is broken. Theory 2, which says that Bessie was abducted by aliens, doesn't have quite that same scope. After all, it only explains the one fact that Bessie was absent from the field. But what about the broken fence? If we accept theory 2, we would need a completely different theory in order to explain that phenomenon, and that means that theory 2 has a worse scope than theory 1. The third criterion of adequacy is fruitfulness. Philosophers sometimes call this predictive power too. A good theory will point us in new directions and suggest new experiments that we might undertake. When comparing theories then, we should ask ourselves, does the theory tell us where to look for new phenomena? A fruitful theory will lead to additional research avenues, whereas an unfruitful one will just be an experimental dead end. And in general, fruitful theories are good, unfruitful ones are bad. Let's apply fruitfulness to the Bessie case too. Here, theory 1 suggests a range of possible experimental findings that we might uncover, if only we do the experiments. We might, for example, strengthen the fence for future cows. If we then observe that the cows can't escape, that's actually pretty good evidence that the comparatively weaker fence was what allowed Bessie to get away in the first place. We might also experiment with improving the pasture. If the grass is much greener inside the fence rather than outside, we might see that future cows put into that pasture won't feel the same need to escape. These experiments are all suggested by theory 1, and if they're confirmed, if we see the phenomena that theory 1 predicts, they would give theory 1 even more support. Well, what about theory 2? Again, the alien explanation here doesn't fare very well. Perhaps it would suggest that if you left cows in the pasture, some of them would disappear, even if the fence was really strong. But again, the relative rarity of alien abduction means that we probably shouldn't expect it to happen very often. So this theory doesn't really suggest much to us in the way of future research. The fourth criterion of adequacy, simplicity, is often referred to as Occam's razor. William of Ockham was a medieval philosopher who gave this criterion an especially memorable treatment. This criterion means that when we're comparing theories, we should ask ourselves, how many forces and entities does the theory posit? And here by entity, we just mean a thing that a theory says exists. And by force, we just mean a way that that entity acts on another entity posited by the theory. In general, a theory that posits fewer entities and forces is better than one that posits a lot of them. So how do we apply simplicity in the Bessie case? Again, theory 1 is going to come out the winner here. Theory 1 only posits entities that we're already familiar with. Cows, weak fences, pastures, and it only posits forces that we're familiar with too. Bessie's desire to get out of the pasture and get to a better one is what caused her to break out.
So theory 2, by contrast, is immensely complicated. It posits additional entities that common sense would find highly unfamiliar. Aliens, alien spaceships, tractor beams, etc. And it posits additional forces acting on those entities as well. So aliens' outlandish desire to kidnap cows is what apparently causes them to act. And whatever weird propulsion system they have that allows their ship to get from their planet to ours, combined with whatever weird force their tractor beam would use to pick her up and take her away. If this story is sounding really far-fetched to you, it's because it is, right? It's a complex story that's used ultimately to explain a really simple phenomenon, which is a cow's absence from a pasture. So again, theory 1 is just superior when it comes to this criterion of adequacy, simplicity.
The fifth and final criterion of adequacy is conservatism. And by the way, this has nothing to do with politics. Philosophers are impressed with conservative theories because these theories have the benefit of being compatible with common sense. And unless you're a radical skeptic, common sense is usually correct. So when comparing theories, we should ask ourselves, does the theory fit with what I already think I have good evidence for? And theories that require us to give up common sense or current science are usually, though not always, incorrect. So a theory that expands on our existing store of knowledge is better than one that tells us we ought to throw out everything that we think we know.
Let's apply this final criterion to the Bessie case. In this case, theory 1 is once again the victor. This theory is compatible with common sense and current science. Cows escaping through broken fences is a daily, mundane occurrence. Cows looking for better pastures is also a daily, mundane occurrence. This theory does not require us to throw out everything that we think we know about the world. By contrast, if theory 2 were true, it would be quite a surprise to a lot of people. If you don't already believe that aliens routinely visit Earth, then thinking that they visited just to abduct Bessie would be quite a stretch. And as the physicist Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And without additional evidence, there's just no reason to think that our common sense is wrong here. Theory 2 is a less conservative theory than theory 1.
Now that we have a clear idea of the 5 criteria of adequacy for abductive arguments, let me mention a few provisos that will help you understand them in context. So first of all, no criterion of adequacy has primacy. There is no single criterion that can outweigh any of the others. Instead, theories have to be evaluated holistically. We have to figure out which theory best fits the most criteria of adequacy. And these criteria are only probative. They don't guarantee that a theory is true. In fact, historically, there have been a lot of cases where we were wrong even though we properly applied the criteria of adequacy. So that doesn't mean, though, that these criteria are not important. Logical thinking, in fact, requires that you apply these anytime you're trying to explain something, not just in scientific contexts. So summing up, abduction is an inference that aims to explain a phenomenon, and this is often called inference to the best explanation. There are 5 criteria of adequacy that we use to determine which theory we ought to believe in when we're trying to explain a phenomenon. These are testability, scope, fruitfulness, simplicity, and conservatism. These criteria apply holistically, and they don't guarantee that you're going to get the truth. But they are the foundation of logical thinking, at least when we're trying to explain something.
That'll conclude our lesson on abduction. Let's wish Bessie a happy journey across the stars.